HR leaders, what's on your mind these days? Is it AI? Is it the economy? The talent market? Remote work? Retention? DEI? Pay transparency? New laws? Our 2024 Workplace Trends Report outlines how HR leaders are thinking about these challenges and what they believe will help their organizations overcome them. Want to find out what they said? Head on over to peoplemanagingpeople.com/Workplace Trends 2024 and download the report to find out.
Are you an organization that is or has struggled to attract, develop, or retain top talent? Are you a manager who is inspired to empower your team to deliver amazing results? Or are you someone who is striving to become better? If you answered yes to any of the above, this podcast is for you. My guest today, Rishon Blumberg, left his career along with his co-founder, Michael Solomon, as talent managers for Grammy Award-winning musicians such as John Mayer to co-found 10X Management, a first-of-its-kind talent agency that matches cream-of-the-crop tech talent with companies ranging from fledgling startups to global titans like IBM, Verizon, BMW, and Google. Recently, Rishon co-authored a book called Game Changer: How to Become 10X in the Talent Economy. And today's podcast, we'll talk about the book, what 10X means, and hear stories of why this is such a relevant topic in today's economy. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tim Reitzma, the resident host of People Managing People. Welcome to the podcast. We're people managing people, and we want to lead and manage better. We're owners, founders, entrepreneurs. We're middle managers. We're team leaders. We're managing people, and yes, we do human resources. But we're not HR, at least not in the traditional sense. We're on a mission to help people lead and manage their teams and organizations more effectively. So if you want to lead and manage better, if you want to become a better organizational leader and more effective people manager, then join us. Keep listening to the podcast to find the tips, tricks, and tools you need to recruit, retain, manage, and lead your people and organization more effectively. And while listening to the show, please subscribe and join our mailing list on peoplemanagingpeople.com to stay up to date with all that's going on. Welcome to the podcast, Rishon. It's such a pleasure to have you on. I know we've been working at scheduling this for a while, and yeah, I'm really excited to get into a good conversation with you today. So welcome.
Thank you, Tim. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So first off, what I like to start off with our guests is just tell us a bit about yourself, your journey, and what led you to start a tech talent agency.
Well, I'm a Gemini for starters. I was born in May. I'm sure that's very relevant.
I love it.
I do love long walks on the beach. I think that my story really starts with where I'm from, which is New York City. I was born and raised here. And I think that growing up in the 70s and sort of coming of age in the 80s and 90s, it was a city that had a lot of dichotomy. There's obviously very large business, finance, and banking and such in New York, but there's also entertainment. And there's certainly back then, and maybe it's beginning to develop a little bit more now, there's a real entrepreneurial spirit in New York. And I think that bug caught me early on and myself and my partner early on. And it really laid the foundation for how we started our career, first in entertainment and then leading to tech. So that I would say that it's sort of my upbringing and where I grew up in the environment that really sort of led me to where I am now.
Mm-hmm. It's quite the journey from the music industry to tech and to tech talent. And so, what drove that change? I mean, that's a bit of a change in direction. So what led to that?
Yeah, I mean, it was really fairly organic. First of all, only one small correction: we still actually have a company in entertainment, the same company that we started about 25 years ago. Really, what led to the shift into tech is the fact that we were hiring ourselves a bunch of tech freelancers starting in the early 90s and then through till we started 10X Management in 2012 to help us build web properties for the artists that we were representing. And also we had partnered with somebody and a dev shop to create apps for the entertainment world. And we just sort of kept bumping up against the same kinds of problems over and over again. And at the time, we didn't really think we could necessarily be part of the solution, but we, I think, identified subconsciously identified, some of the inefficiencies that were happening at that time in technology, and particularly in the freelance side of technology. And then around 2010, people started to write headlines about, tech talent being the next rock stars. And I think for us, it was a little bit of a light bulb moment, thinking, we have this skill and this accumulation of knowledge about how to represent and protect talent. And if tech talent is not all that dissimilar to rock stars, perhaps they could benefit from the same kinds of protection and career guidance that entertainers, athletes, actors have benefited from for decades. And so we just sort of jumped into it without thinking about it too much. And it really clicked very, very quickly. So in 2011, we actually found our first client to work with, who actually was a musician, but instead of paying for their life as a musician sort of through, waitering or what have you, sort of more transient skill sets, he was coding in order to pay for his music career. And so when we approached him with this concept, he sort of understood the value proposition, both from the tech side, but also from the understanding of how artists had dealt with managers and agents. And it very quickly, blossomed into a great relationship. And then in 2012, we sort of formalized the company and sort of quickly ramped up. And the books, the genesis of the book really started at that point. Again, we, sort of organically, we had not set out to intentionally write a book, but there were so many interesting things that we learned and saw within the tech ecosystem that were harbingers for what was happening in the broader economy. And so, probably, I don't know, around 2017 or so, we started thinking about how can we further educate the marketplace, which is really what we had been doing with 10X between 2012 and 2018. Like, how can we educate the marketplace, A, about what we do and why what we do is different, and B, what we're seeing across all these different verticals and all these different types of companies, things that are working and things that aren't working. And that was really the genesis for the book.
Wow. It's such an interesting journey just to, and you lay out a lot of stories in the book, but going from, and still are in the music business and taking what you and Michael learned there to bring it to the tech world. And so let's maybe just dive into this concept of 10X.
Yeah.
And so the book is How to Be 10X in a Talent Economy. So what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the foundation for the theories that we have and the things we talk about in the book. It's this idea of 10Xers, which are, they're real. This isn't just sort of some sort of fantasy. And we talk about a variety of different types of 10Xers in the book. But the first one that we really encountered was Bruce Springsteen. And we didn't think of him as a 10Xer at the time. We just thought of him as like, this is a person who is at the top of their game, clearly brilliant. But not only brilliant in the way that they write songs and present songs, but brilliant in their thought, in the way that they've surrounded themselves with the support crew and team, from managers to agents to touring crew to producers. I think Bruce really keenly understood the value of bringing excellence in all these different areas. And so for us, what a 10Xer is somebody who possesses a very high IQ, but more importantly, a very high EQ, their emotional quotient, their understanding of how to relate to others, how to communicate effectively, how to feel empathy, is equally as developed. So this really allows these very high achievers to bring something unique to whatever project they're working on. They're obviously bringing exceptional mind share, the knowledge that they have and have accumulated over the course of their life and their career, but they're also bringing the ability to communicate all those things that are going on in their head. I'm sure you've had people in your lives who are, in your life who are really, really brilliant, but maybe just don't communicate very well or are odd in different ways that makes it more challenging to understand, A, what makes them brilliant and how that brilliance can affect and change your life and your career. So the 10Xer is something to achieve to. or aspire to rather. They do exist, but not everybody can be 10x. So really the premise of the book is what can businesses do to become more 10x and more hospitable for 10xers? And what can individuals do to sort of push themselves down that 10x spectrum? Some may reach 10xness, some may have those components and learn the skills necessary to bring that level of 10x value. But most people are just striving to get better and closer to 10x. And that's where I think most of us live.
I think so. I think most, at least the people that I know, are striving for that. And right off the bat, right in page 8 of the book, you've defined this as somebody as a 10xer, and I like what you write is balanced with enough humility to pivot when great advice comes along. And I'm guessing that's speaking about the talent, but it really kind of marries not just IQ, but with EQ. And so you're talking about companies. And so what does it take then for a company to create a space for people to strive to become 10x?
Yeah, I mean, that was really, and by the way, the book is sort of split up into 2 sections. The first half of the book is really talking to companies about what they can do to be more hospitable and to sort of 10x themselves. And then the second half is really geared towards the individual. What we learned working with all these different types of companies in different verticals through 10x Management and 10x Ascend is that there are companies at different places on the spectrum of being hospitable to these things. We use tech as sort of the backdrop in the book, and there's a intentional reason for that, and that is that more tech companies have positioned themselves to be hospitable to 10xers. And what that really means is sort of an updating or a modernization of the way the marketplace and the work world views itself. I sometimes use the analogy of the movie Office Space, which perhaps you remember. It's this movie about a tech company, but with this very generic middle management. They don't know who the employees are, what they care about, what their wants are, their needs are. It's really a hilarious take at skewering what the work world, the old way of work was like. It was very much you're a cog in the machine. The new way of work is really drastically different. First of all, technology allows companies to do significantly more with fewer resources. So when you're doing more with less, every single person that works at your company needs to be on this 10x spectrum, because you're going to expect so much more from employees now than you did 20, 30, 40 years ago. You can't throw people at the problem. You have to throw sophistication at a problem. And so for companies to really attract people that are super high performers, it has to be a much more bespoke approach. You can't just view somebody as a cog in the machine. And it really starts at the process where you are interviewing somebody to bring them on board. And we sort of get into this tactically towards the end of the book. We have some really prescriptive things that we believe companies need to do when approaching hiring a W-2 employee or a 1099 freelancer. And all of it really is about understanding who the person is that you're trying to hire. What motivates them? What are their life goals? Does your company align with their mission? Because 10Xers and the modern workforce, they're mission driven. They want to work on projects that align with their personal values and how they want the world to be improved by what it is that they do. So it's really, really important for companies to think from a bespoke mindset, think about who the people are, and that trickles down into the management philosophy as well. Just requiring somebody to have the TPS reports on your desk by Monday and coming in over the weekend to get stuff done, it doesn't really work anymore. You have to have buy-in with the team. You have to set SMART goals or OKRs, things that we talk about in the book. You really need a mindset of getting everybody on the same page so that they can sort of focus on what it is that the company's goals are at that moment in time. And so we spend, probably about 5 chapters talking about a variety of different things that companies can do. But it really boils down in essence to, a people first approach, managing to the person, not to a large group of people, not to cogs, right? So it's personalization, I would say, is the key for that first half of the book.
it just sounds easy, and it sounds every company needs to be following this approach. But yet, I know companies. I won't use names, but I do know companies who are just those cog in the wheel type environments. That 0x company, as you describe in the book. And so, what are some practical steps an organization needs to take? Because you're absolutely right. People are increasingly looking for positions, looking for projects to work on that are aligned with their own personal values, their own visions, their own missions. And so, how do we find people, or how do we create environments then that support a change?
Yeah. Well, it is philosophically, it's simple, but I think in practice it's incredibly hard, as you point out.
Yeah.
And it requires a lot of intentionality. Right off the bat, I think it's important for companies to identify what their values are and make those values, put those values front and center, not just in sort of the written form that it's actually physically front and center, which we do think is important, but that they actually practice those values day in and day out, and review them and make sure that they are adhering to those values. Because at the end of the day, if the environment that you're in, the culture and the values of the company that you're working with don't really align with the rhetoric, you're never going to be able to sustain employees' happiness. I just finished reading the book about WeWork, and it was really, really interesting. I mean, WeWork is a wonderful business, but at some point along the way, they sort of got lost in believing their own BS, so to speak, and not truly living what it is that they were putting forth as their value proposition. And we saw sort of similar things happen at Uber early on. Companies, even the best intentioned, forward thinking companies, get caught up in this. So from our standpoint, it starts with defining the values and the culture that you want, living those values and that culture day in and day out. And it has to start from the top. You can't have the worker class of a company believing the values and the culture, and then have management and top, especially senior management, not really adhere to that. That'll never work. So it's really a top-down philosophy, and it's only going to work in companies where it starts at the top and it is constantly reinforced downward. So I think that's really the beginning of it, and it's about being very intentional. You sort of you don't accidentally stumble into these situations. It's intentionally created.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious if you have a company in mind that is kind of the gold standard, if you will, for a 10X company.
I don't really have a specific company in mind. We have worked with many of them over the years. We try to, at our own company, live these values day in and day out. And we don't find it particularly hard. We're a small company, and I do think it's easier at a small company, but it's still very intentional. And by the way, I don't know how much we'll get into sort of how the pandemic shifted any of these things, because it's not drastic, but within the confines of a pandemic and what we're dealing with right now, intentionality becomes even more important, because when you have a fully distributed team, as most companies do, in order to keep that connection, that human connection, and to be able to live those values and keep the culture that you want, you have to have intentionality in how you connect one-on-one with your employees, how they connect as a team, so that they don't lose a lot of that connection. So no matter whether I did have a perfect company in mind, which I don't, the key here is really intentionality and trying to understand the people who make up and comprise your workforce. Who are they? What do they need? What support can you provide for them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sorry to put you on the spot there. I'm so intrigued by this, because I've listened to a number of podcasts of companies and leaders who are aspiring, but yet it's a little harder to put it into practice. I was talking with somebody at a company recently who they're about a 60, 65 person company, distributed, thanks to the pandemic, but distributed around the globe. And the story is that the leader recently, not being prompted, just decided to call up everybody and stayed up late to I guess combat the time zones and got up early to make sure people weren't staying up late to listen to the CEO talk to them. But really, the CEO just wanted to check in with people, and understand how people are feeling and doing, and then took a lot of those insights and fed it back to the people and culture and HR team and saying, hey, like I think we need to be doing something in this particular area. And I love that because, it takes time. The CEO is busy and that time is valuable, but I love that he took the time to learn about how people are feeling. And I think, it doesn't have to be something super prescriptive. It could just be getting on Slack or getting on a Google Meet or picking up the old phone and having a conversation to start.
I think that's a fabulous example. And it's something that we have done since the pandemic is increase the number of one-on-ones that we have with our employees. We only have about 12 employees. So for us, it's not as much of a time constraint as somebody who'd have to do that 65 times. But there's something really, really valuable in just connecting one-on-one. And these one-on-ones are not specifically work-related. It can sort of be any topic, and it can be a 5-minute conversation. It can be a 30-minute conversation. But this idea that you understand where your employees are at is central to what we're talking about in the book. It is a people-first management approach. And again, when you're doing more with less, when these people are so vital, it's not like you've got a lot of employees who are just kind of fluff. I sort of use bank tellers and ATMs as a good example of, banks in the 1970s, in the 1960s, the number of bank tellers and people that worked in those positions, customer-facing positions, was significantly larger than in the 2000s when you've got, ATMs and automated tellers all over the place. You can't throw bodies at those problems anymore. So the people that you have that are on your front line, especially innovating and creating the technology that supports your company, they just have to be great. And in order for them to become great within your organization, you have to understand who they are and what they care about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the book, you talk about 0x management to 10x management. And I find this really intriguing because zero doesn't learn much about employees. Can't customize processes. I've worked in organizations that are exactly that. And then the 10X is constantly learning about employees, getting clear understanding of motivations, work closely to solicit feedback. It's more than just managing that day to day. It's really understanding the motivations of your team as an individual.
Yeah. No, that is exactly right. And look, we understand at huge companies, this can be a real challenge. But that's why the top-down philosophy is so vital, because if that is stressed, let's say there's a team of 30 or 40 people with a manager, it's going to be difficult for the manager to know everything about that one person. But we kind of view the role of the manager as less of a micromanager, which I think is very often what sort of older school companies view as management. It's like, we're going to micromanage these things. I'm going to just own this whole thing. For us, it's less about micromanagement and it's more about personality management. When you have 10Xers or when you have exceptional people on your team, by and large, you kind of want to get out of their way and let them do what they do best. But in order to do that, you have to figure out what it is, what environment, what needs do they have, what needs do they need to have met in order for them to put those best feet forward. In some cases, and this really did change with the pandemic, but in some cases it was like, okay, you want to work off site for the next week and just hunker down and get into a flow state where you don't have to be in meetings and you don't have to be interrupted. And you want to work at odd hours. You want to be coding from 9 p.m. to 5 in the morning. Fine. No problem. A lot of companies have problems with simply granting those kinds of requests. Like, no, you've got to be in this meeting. And I think we've got some, really sort of marquee leaders with Steve Jobs, who said famously, I don't hire brilliant people so I can tell them what to do. I hire brilliant people so they can tell me what to do. And then you have Elon Musk, who recently, probably in the last year or so, put out a memo saying, if you don't think you need to be in a meeting, I want you to get up and leave that meeting. You don't need to be at any meeting you don't feel is beneficial or necessary for you. Those two philosophies, I think, are really central to what it is we're talking about. Brilliant people, high contributors like 10Xers, they need the space and flexibility to do what they do best without being micromanaged. And they also need to get into the flow state, which we talk about in the book, this place where you're not disturbed and you can really just micro focus in on what you're doing. And when you get into the flow state, you really create much more effectively. And this is where the similarity, I think, between tech talent and entertainers and musicians in particular, where we see a lot of overlap. This idea of creating in the flow state is something that really comes from the arts, and I think translates very nicely into tech. So those are some of the things that are really vital in what a modern manager has to do. It's creating the environment and getting out of the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I've heard companies that say, "Oh, you can work whenever you want. Doesn't matter what your hours are, as long as you're at the meetings during regular work hours."
Right.
And so it kind of contradicts itself. And I also heard a story recently of a top tech talent person who was looking at a contract, and there in that contract were core work hours, and she said, "But I don't want to work core work hours. I want to define my own core work hours. There's snow in the mountains here I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia. I want to go skiing when everyone else is working, and I'll do my coding at night." And ultimately wasn't able to take the contract.
Yeah.
And so it's a real big shift. And I think the pandemic has really expedited the shift and really challenged the philosophy of how we work.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think if there is any kind of silver lining to the pandemic, it is this realization that not only can work continue when you have a distributed team, but in some cases it can be even better, more productive when you have a distributed team for exactly those reasons. The incessant meetings, the, people dropping in your office or stopping by your desk and interrupting that ability to work. And also the pressure that it adds to an individual contributor to have to deal with their quote unquote life around the typical work schedule. It just works a lot better when you have the flexibility. The other thing I've learned, though, is that there's a big difference in choosing to work remote and being forced to work remote.
Big difference.
Yeah, it's a big difference. Like I was all for remote, and I would work remote one day a week prior to the pandemic. And now it's sort of flipped. I'll go into the office maybe once a week just to sort of see what's going on. Not that there's anybody else there, but just for the routine. I don't love sort of being forced to work from home 4 or 5 days a week or 6 days a week. So, that is a challenge. But I do think the pandemic, if there's a silver lining, it's really woken up companies to this reality of remote work. And that was a little bit of the sort of genesis of writing this book. It was that we were having so much trouble getting companies to understand that where they get the most benefit is not from finding the best and brightest necessarily in their backyard, but finding the best and brightest, period, wherever they may be, to solve this specific problem that they might have. I think the pandemic really helped drive that idea home.
Yeah, it's true. It's even a company that I'm involved in. We're able to now expand where we look for talent instead of the constraints of a specific location.
Yeah.
And we're working with a company now who found an amazing talent in France. And then the question is, well, how are we going to employ this person? Well, there's ways. That's something that's really straightforward. That's easy to do. We can figure that out. But if that's where your talent is, if that's the skill set you need to continue to grow your business, that old notion of, well, we don't have an entity or we can't hire in that jurisdiction or wherever, it's almost out the window, and it's really forcing organizations to shift. So, but, we've talked about a bit about companies and a bit about management, but what about the individual? And so that individual who is on that path or striving to be 10x or is that 10x talent, how is it that maybe has the market shifted because of the pandemic? And is there, I guess, more negotiating power or more in the hands, in control of that 10xer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the pandemic has necessarily shifted this side of the equation all that much. In technology in particular, there is such a massive supply and demand imbalance between the number of needs within the marketplace for sophisticated talent and the number of sophisticated people that are out there. So I do think that it is a seller's market on the employee side, meaning that if you are an in-demand talent, you have the leverage to really negotiate more effectively than I think you ever have before. And that's, again, where the similarity with entertainment and sports comes into play, because, if you've got the LeBron James of tech talent, you want to give them what they need in order to come work with your organization, because they can make, unprecedented progress and add certain value to your company. So I think that there's this element, and really in the backdrop of what we do at 10X Management with the tech talent that we represent, is we really take all of the business elements off of their plate and free them up to do what it is they do best, which is innovating and developing. And that was really the key shift in the marketplace when we came into it, that we sort of brought to the marketplace, which is this idea that this kind of talent needs the same kind of representation that LeBron James needs. If LeBron James had to negotiate all of his own contracts and deal with all of the business elements that surround a professional athlete, he had to deal with his own accounting and his own investments and his own, travel arrangements. If he didn't have these teams of professionals around him, he would not be the exceptional basketball player that he is today. And the same applies for any individual. And so what we talk about in the second half of the book is really, if you want to be 10X, first of all, you have to be a lifelong learner. It's unclear what future skills are going to be necessary, but what we do know is the flexibility to learn whatever those skills are is going to be paramount. That's the most important skill you need to have, is sort of this willingness to continue to learn in the face of an ever-changing landscape. And part of learning is getting feedback. And sometimes that's feedback from a coworker, feedback from a manager who's, who manages your team. But it can also be from people outside of your organization, just people in your life who have a sort of skin in the game, somebody who cares about your well-being. And I don't necessarily mean a parent or a family member, although family members can play this role, but it can be a mentor. It could be, a professor you worked with in college, you had a connection with, somebody that can give you some outside perspective, not just on who you are, but sort of what the environment is that you're living in. This is all part of the learning process, and having somebody in your life that you can find who has skin in the game, who can play what we call the third party effect. That's kind of the role that the agent plays for, we play for tech talent, but, an agent would play for like Tom Cruise, where they can negotiate on behalf of Tom Cruise far more effectively than Tom Cruise can negotiate on behalf of himself. It just doesn't work as well to say, I'm a great actor. No, I'm the best actor. I'm going to be the best actor for this role. It doesn't work as well as somebody else singing those praises for you. So as you sort of develop in your career, look for those people in your life that can play that role. Empower your manager to play that role. A great manager fights for the people on their team, whether it's getting a raise, whether it's getting a promotion, whether it's working on a certain project. Those are the things that are crucial.
I love the concept of getting feedback. It's a previous guest calls feedback as a gift. And sometimes we need to go and solicit that gift and get that feedback. But it's so important to our individual growth, our company growth. But as an individual, how do we know where we need to focus if we're just listening, to our own narrative, but getting feedback and soliciting feedback from those. And again, I love that concept, that third party effect, or the people who have skin in the game, who care. It's so important, but it definitely has to be rooted in trust. And so let's maybe kind of talk a little bit about how trust and 10X kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think that trust is so much more than 10X. It is the core of everything we do, both interpersonally and professionally. Trust is one of those things, and this is the cliche. It takes a lifetime to build and a second to break. Trust is something that you have to constantly keep working on, and you demonstrate trust as a manager by fighting for your charges, the people on your team. Sometimes if you forego something to benefit your team, that helps demonstrate trust. When you protect the people on your team, we talk about, I don't actually know if we use this phrase in the book, but this concept of a blame thrower, somebody who's always constantly blaming somebody else. That is not a way to get trust. Trust is that thing, that fabric that binds together people, either who are working together, who are in the trenches together in war, in reality, and in metaphorically. If you don't trust the people that are around you, your company is never going to achieve 10X-ness. And I think that holds true for interpersonal relationships as well. It's really the foundation of our entire society. So trust, I think it's kind of important.
Yeah, just a small concept. It's we've talked about this and have facilitated this concept of trust in organizations, and man, people have vastly different interpretations or understanding of what trust is. I mean, I'm sure we could spend hours just talking about the definition and is it earned, is it gained, but really the concept of 10X, as an individual. As an organization, we need to have trust. We need to trust each other. We need to trust our management. But as an organization, we need to trust our people. So, 9 to 5 doesn't equal trust. I saw a headline of an article, and I hadn't read it yet, but it just came through this morning about how someone was working in an organization. The headline was, so-and-so was paid for 10 years, but didn't show up to work. Mm. And so, just because you've got 9 to 5 hours doesn't mean that ultimately builds trust. We don't know if they're being productive, whether it's 9 to 5 or wherever they are. So it's that foundation.
Yeah.
So I think as we kind of wrap up, I love the book. I love the way it's laid out. The two parts about the organization and about 10X talent, the individual. And I love that there's just helpful summaries at the end of every chapter, but also you talk about 0 to 5 to 10. Is that almost like a continuum, right? That's what we're striving to be. And so if somebody's listening to this podcast, somebody is intrigued about the book, what is one or two big takeaways that they'll get from reading this book?
Well, I do think feedback, I would say the two big things for the individual is the desire and willingness to be a continuous learner, a lifelong learner, and the importance of feedback. I think if you just take those two things away from this podcast or the book, I think you will benefit greatly from it. I think people underestimate the need to be a lifelong learner. And part of lifelong learning is the process of feedback. You can't truly learn if you're not getting feedback of your work product or your actions from those around you and those that are most affected by it. My partner even goes so far as to do anonymous feedback from everybody in his life, which can be daunting. I don't quite understand how he does that and processes it but it's something he feels is incredibly important. So I don't know that I would necessarily go that far, but you have to find those people in your life whom you trust, whom you can get honest feedback from. And be able to take that feedback and utilize it to improve yourself, again, both personally and professionally.
Such great advice, great idea there. Just the idea of soliciting anonymous feedback, it makes me makes me nervous.
Yeah.
But I do like that idea because it's what we do with that feedback really helps define us and helps us learn and grow and pivot and change. And those people that we trust and love and care, and that we're soliciting this feedback from, it's so important. It's so powerful. I think after this podcast, I might reach out to a good friend of mine and just solicit some feedback.
There you go.
From how my week went and where I need to just to learn and grow. Yeah. And again, if we treat feedback as a gift, as an opportunity to grow, if we reframe it from, I'm getting feedback as a negative and treat it as, this is an opportunity. Mm-hmm. It'll almost inherently turn us into those lifelong learners. Yeah. And
I think just the action of being vulnerable enough to ask for feedback, I think in and of itself is a learning experience and sort of sends the signal that you want something, right? You're not just complacent and just sort of resting on your laurels and what you do is good enough. You want to be better. And people help people who want to be better. It's a way of sort of manifesting your own success by asking for help, soliciting things from people. It shows that you care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of someone that I've been coaching, and at first it was, this individual just really didn't care what other people were thinking about them. And to a point where they are soliciting that feedback, and their growth has been exponential over the last couple months.
That's great.
A real change in them. So I appreciate that. And yes, that's a couple of great pieces of advice. I encourage people to pick up the books. It's found wherever you find your books, Amazon, you name it. And it's a great book. And I encourage everyone to read it. So, Rishon, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. Before I jump, I did want to mention we created a fun sort of 10X quiz where you can take it as an individual to see sort of where you are on that spectrum. And you can also take it on behalf of your company to see where they are on that spectrum. And you can find the quiz at gamechangerthebook.com. And my contact and my partner's contact are also there as well.
That's great. That's gamechangerthebook.com. Fantastic resources to be found on your website. And again, thanks for coming on. And for those who are listening, really encourage you to go and solicit some feedback today from those who you trust and turn that into an opportunity to grow. And so thanks again for coming on, Rishon. Thanks to those who are listening. And as always, we'd love for your feedback. So feel free to reach out at peoplemanagingpeople.com and let us know what you think of this episode, as well as the content that we are producing. So with that, have a great day, everyone. Take care.